Paradigm. Jacob and Dee are co-creators of Zora, and they're going to be talking about the NFT paradigm and inverting the internet in a talk that's titled Crypto Media. So without further ado, please welcome Jacob and Dee, and let's hear more about crypto media. Let's kick off NFT Hack and the summit. Jacob, Dee.
Sweet. We're here. I'm just about to share my screen. One sec. Coolio. All right. Can you see my screen?
You're all good.
All right, brilliant. So yeah, hi everyone. Dee and I are pretty excited to run through this talk and presentation today. We've titled it Internet Renaissance. So shift away from the crypto media title. I guess what we want to talk about today is basically like the moment of time we're in the ecosystem generally. I think NFTs have like catapulted through into the zeitgeist and kind of having this amazing moment. I think what we want to do is like take a step back and kind of talk about like, well, why is this moment happening? What is the kind of the history and the state of the internet that has led us to this moment? What are NFTs as a paradigm, why they're important, and then crucially, like where we think the space is today and where we think it needs to go. It's so incredibly early. There is still so much left to build. And I think, yeah, we're just excited to go through those details. So yeah, just a quick intro on me. I'm Jacob. I'm one of the co-creators of Zora. Was previously at Coinbase before Zora, where I worked with Dee, and I'll let Dee introduce himself quickly before we jump in.
Yep, Dee, another one of the co-creators at Zora. I met Jacob while working at Coinbase. I look after everything kind of artists, creators, and whatnot at Zora. So yeah, pretty excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Sweet. Okay, let's jump in. So let me just press next. So let's start with the obvious. So NFTs are undoubtedly a paradigm shift. And specifically, they're a paradigm shift in information ownership. So if we think about the internet pre-NFTs, there've kind of been two dominant systems of information ownership. So if you think about the media you create, you know, content, anything that's being put on the internet, there's typically two systems of ownerships that have existed and have like kind of defined how we create and share media today. One is the copyright system. So the legal system that's kind of instituted, you know, by governments and across jurisdictions all over the world. And copyright is defined by, well, if I have ownership over this piece of media or information, I have the right to restrict reuse and distribution and copy paste, downloading, like all those things. So that's like kind of think of that as like the fiat information ownership system. The kind of second bucket, which is obviously related to copyright, is platform content and media and information ownership. So when you create a piece of media or a piece of content and you post it onto a platform, that platform is like, you know, monetizing that information, creating value, generating value from that. And you know, if you're a big enough creator, you may see some flow through from that ownership. But for most of us, like everything that we're creating on the internet, the value rounds down to zero, and the platforms kind of monetize that and essentially have de facto ownership over that media content instead of us as the creator. So the problem with the kind of two predominant information ownership systems is that it's kind of a paradox. Basically, like to generate value from that information, you have to restrict access to it. So you basically build a platform, like essentially functions as a walled garden. That walled garden is built out of advertising or subscription or pay-per-view. And the paradox is that you want to build a walled garden, but fit everyone in the world inside of it to maximize the value capture. So if you think about like the universe of the internet today, we kind of live on these mega platforms, these huge walled gardens that bundle everything into a single place. So all of the media you create, the social graph of people who are creating and interacting, the community on those platforms. And it's those platforms who can benefit the most from owning that content. So our view is that we've never really escaped intranets. You know, the Instagrams, the TikToks, the YouTubes, the Facebooks, the Spotifys, they're all essentially private networks that take ownership of the media and the content and the information that we create. They monetize it better than any of us. And then, you know, we get paid in social currencies like likes or follows. And like I said earlier, if you're big enough, you may get AdSense revenue or a share on the actual dollars generated. And like, this is the entire mental model that kind of forms how we think about information ownership. Like, oh, for this to generate value, we must restrict access to it. So NFTs, there's kind of like two gems of like quotes that I think you should hold in your mind to think about, like, well, what's actually happening with this new value system? Why are NFTs a paradigm shift and a complete inversion of how we think about media ownership? So the one on the left, Stuart Brand in the 80s, it calls out like information wants to be free, but information also wants to be expensive, and that tension will not go away. So if you think about that, it's like information, like we want to share it, we want to copy it, we want to download it, we want to give, like we want to distribute it as far and wide as the information wants to go. But in the kind of prior paradigm of information ownership, that is at odds with the fact that, well, the only way you can generate value is to restrict access. The second kind of gem that you should hold in your mind when thinking about NFTs is this one by Mackenzie Walk, which she said in 2016 in an amazing essay called My Collectible Ass, is the future of collecting may be less in owning the thing that nobody else has and more about owning the thing that everybody else has. So it's not about owning the thing that no one has. You know, you could have a physical artwork that only lives on your wall, but what if you own the piece of media that's on 1 million people's screens? It's a very weird way to think about ownership, but in practice, that is a step towards what is actually happening and enabled by NFTs, which kind of, you know, alleviates this, you know, perpetual tension that has been called out with the prior internet, which is like, well, how could we have information that is both universally free and accessible to consume, but also be recognized for its inherent value to society and to whoever the creator of that information was. So NFTs are a paradigm shift because it inverts the way that we think about information ownership. And it really like gives us the best of both worlds for information ownership on the internet. So by way of example, like just to kind of think about like, well, how this works in practice. And if you've been in the NFT space for a little bit, like you've probably heard this Mona Lisa analogy a million times. But if you think of NFTs as something similar to the Mona Lisa as an artifact, it is individually ownable, but it lives in the public domain. So it's universally free for anyone on the planet, anyone on the internet to copy, remix, redistribute, print on a poster, put on a t-shirt, post on Instagram. And every time that redistribution or that reproduction is happening, that isn't taking value away from the original. That's actually making the original Mona Lisa more valuable because it's becoming more well-known, more culturally relevant, you know, has more notoriety. And as a cultural artifact, like accrues more value, the more widely known it becomes. So to kind of like shift the perspective with kind of by like this, you know, visualization and, you know, crude analogy, it's like, well, what if that same value system now starts to apply to every piece of information, media, and content on the internet? You know, be it memes, be it YouTube videos, Instagram posts, typefaces, websites themselves. What if we do now have this like canonical original, this provable original that can be individually owned, but is now, you know, universally accessible to the entire internet to be freely shared and copied and distributed and built on top of. And that's where NFTs kind of get us there. So, you know, with an NFT, it's the opposite to copyright, or the opposite to how platforms function. It's like the more you copy paste, the more you share it, the more you download it, the more it's being displayed, the more valuable you're making that original instance, the more valuable you're making that NFT. So if we think about pre-NFTs, this is kind of how you would view most platforms. So you have a platform and they're kind of this walled garden that content is bundled within and restricted within. And to move it between platforms, you'd have to, copy and paste or duplicate or pirate or download or whatever. NFTs completely flip it. So now it's like, well, you can have a single NFT and now any platform on the internet can freely build on top of it. So instead of TikTok having a monopoly on the entire content database of TikTok, it's like, well, what if now every single developer on the planet had complete universal access to, that database? Like, imagine, would we have just this singular feed experience that everyone can build on top of, or what would it look like if there are now thousands of websites that can, or apps that can start to build and remix and curate all of that content, not just TikTok? So that gives you a sense of like the platform inversion that happens because of NFTs. So NFTs are undoubtedly a paradigm shift. In our view, they're a paradigm shift that's halfway there. So the current construction or the ecosystem today is basically, we have an amazing ecosystem of galleries, or what the nomenclature of marketplaces. So there is probably like now 15 to 20 different marketplaces. And one of the most common, and this is all aggregated, a level below or above, however you want to view it, by OpenSea. But essentially, one of the biggest questions that a first-time creator coming into the ecosystem is like, well, which marketplace should I mint on? And then the problem is that when you mint on a marketplace, the marketplace owns the market. You end up becoming bound to that marketplace in a lot of ways. Of course, for some of these marketplaces, you can take your NFT post sale and you can start to move it around. But unfortunately, the value system that accrues there is built and held within the marketplace themselves. So the marketplaces charge fees. Once you kind of like do a primary sale or move it, it's like, well, where does this value capture happen? And there isn't any interoperability between marketplaces today. So you could have anywhere between 5, or you could have as many markets as there are marketplaces on a singular NFT. So we're kind of finding ourselves in a similar situation to pre-NFT internet, which is, well, okay, I now have to like pick which platform I want to bound myself to, which I mint on, and then accrue all the value. But there isn't this kind of like interoperability that the technology allows for. So the media and the content may be universally accessible, but currently we see a marketplace per platform, which is kind of like giving us this head fake. And the insight is that NFTs are bound to marketplaces. So for us, for Zora, we started as a marketplace, and like we love that model. We get to have a strong curatorial sensibility. We get to charge a fee on top of everything that's going on. And when we were starting to build for NFTs, we kind of had this awakening, which was like, well, there are amazing NFTs on every single one of these marketplaces. And it's one thing for us to curate and point to one of those NFTs, but in what we wanted to do is go like, hey, this amazingly beautiful artwork on Super Rare, wouldn't it be great if we could just point to not only the NFT, but also the market on Zora? So we don't have to compete in this zero-sum competition for like winning absolutely every single artist. What if there was some shared public layer that meant we're all building on the same market? And what if that market could be owned by the creator themselves? So we kind of ran into this head first. We realized ourselves as like, oh shit, like the whole reason we're building on this technology is to create a new open and public infrastructure for creators to reclaim ownership of their work. And the way that marketplaces function is kind of at odds with that. Like us ourselves as a walled garden. And we're getting like very early, like flashbacks for the early decentralized exchange era. So if you remember, for those in crypto at the time, like there was kind of this first wave of order book based decentralized exchanges, and they were directionally correct. It was like, yes, there should absolutely be exchanges that are decentralized and protocol based. But the early instantiations were a little skeuomorphic. It was like, well, why don't we take the order book model that we see on traditional exchanges like Coinbase or the NYSE or the NASDAQ and put that on the blockchain? But the result is you had, even though it was like this global and open system, you still had all of this fragmented and competitive like liquidity. So it's very hard to like create this unified system that would allow for liquidity to accrue into a single point. And then crucially, most of them were not entirely permissionless. So you would need to go convince a particular relay or a DEX to actually list your token. It wasn't a permissionless and public tool. There was still this kind of like middleman that you'd have to go through to access the technology. So the shift from early DEX to something like Uniswap really did like three things. It was a net new market model that hadn't been seen pre-crypto. It was a model that led to global liquidity. So it was like a more effective model. Instead of seeing fragmentation across all of these different order books, it was like, well, what if you can collapse it all into a single pool? And then the third and most important was it was entirely permissionless and completely open for any developer or person on the internet to use and start an exchange. So for $5 or $10 in gas, you could start up an exchange and get the same power out of the box as a developer as you would, the entirety of something like Coinbase or Binance, which is just a huge paradigm shift in, so you can get a DEX with a couple of lines of code. So for early NFT, I think we're kind of seeing a similar thing, which is it's directionally correct. There's no doubt about that. Like, yes, there needs to be a market model and a way for value to accrue to the creators and the people who are minting and curating and collecting these NFTs. But the model, again, is a little skeuomorphic. It's like, let's bring auction house and put it on the blockchain. And we're kind of finding ourselves in a similar position. There is like a lot of fragmented liquidity that has been trying to be aggregated in multiple different places, but it's resulting in like, okay, creators having to mint on 15 different places, fragmenting not only the markets for those NFTs, but their identity across those platforms too. And most, if not all, tend not to be permissionless. So there's different curatorial standards. The most marketplaces do not have open source or verified contracts. They are not like entirely open tools that developers can build on top of and get the benefit of this like liquidity out of the gate. So for us, it was like, well, okay, we were to take that same conceptual leap for NFTs. What would it mean what would the net new market model be for NFTs? How would that model enable global liquidity that would open up the ability for any developer or creator to start to easily build on top of this new paradigm? And how can we make it entirely permissionless? So to speak to the net new market model, we designed the entire protocol around like, well, instead of us being a marketplace, being a protocol, the NFT is the marketplace. So you know exactly where the market needs to be. The amazing thing about NFTs is that they have a very unique market structure. There is only it's one to many. There is only ever one owner, and there are many people trying to buy. So this is very different to, say, a fungible token, which has a many-to-many relationship. So while something like Uniswap or SushiSwap or a model like that may be winner takes most, it's very hard for it to be winner takes all because the types of relationships you need between those many-to-many buyers and sellers means you'll probably still need multiple forms of market. For an NFT, it's very different. The market collapses to a single point at every time. You know exactly who the owner is. So the protocol was designed entirely around this notion that's like, well, let's build the market into the NFT itself, and let's give that market ownership to the artist, to the creator of that NFT. So when you're minting your NFT, you're minting the market for it, and that market is entirely open for anyone to build on top of it. And there are some interesting design decisions which you can see in the docs, which we'll link later, where it's not about the highest bidder. So anyone can bid in any currency, anyone can bid at any time, and you as the owner do not have to accept the highest bidder. If you see an anonymous bid for, say, $10,000, but then a bid from Kanye West for $500, you may be inclined to take the one from Kanye West because it could increase the value of your work long term. And there is a notion of a creator share and perpetual equity built into this token, so you can realize that at the time. So the results of the protocol, so one thing to call out is that the way we deployed the protocol was a one-time deployment. So Zora protocol, we did not build any ability for upgrades. Any upgrades would have to be through social consensus. which means that the protocol is entirely unstoppable. So we can't stop the protocol even if we wanted to. Anyone can mint on it. Anyone can interact with the markets. It is like, by all intents and purposes, open public infrastructure that allows you to create these NFTs that can survive outside of the lifetime of any given marketplace or platform. And gears it towards permanence as far as you possibly can. So to speak on the permanence piece, basically, whenever you mint a token on the Zora protocol, you have to mint the content hash, the SHA-256 hash of what that piece of media is. That hash, when you mint it, is immutable. You can never change it. And what that does is it means that if you need to, say it's like you initially choose IPFS or Arweave or even AWS as somewhere to store your media, if that file storage solution, for whatever reason, turns out that it goes down or was incorrect or there's a better model, the owner can always update the link of that token at any given point in time. And the content hash means the public can always verify that link is pointing to the exact right piece of media at that point. If you try and, if you buy a token and change the link to a piece of media that is, not what the NFT was minted for, it's trivial for the public to compare that to the signature of the media in the hash. So yeah, when you're creating on the Zora protocol, your NFTs are entirely platformless. So if the Zora.co website went down or the team went away, the market is still running for it. The NFT still exists. Anyone can build on top of it. So you don't need our permission to create your type of NFT. It can be literally any form of NFT you can mint. And the permanence aspect is okay, how can we create mechanisms that means that this NFT as an artifact can survive for as long as the Ethereum blockchain itself, which could be decades, or depending on how optimistic you are on blockchain technology, the NFTs will last for as long as Ethereum itself, which could be an extremely long time. Another point to talk about is this notion of perpetual equity. So if you think about someone like Jean-Michel Basquiat, it's like the original, his first painting sold for $200 in the early 80s. And, as the culture and society woke up to the beauty and the notoriety of his art, that value skyrocketed into the tens of millions, hundreds of millions over time. And in the traditional art world, resale royalties have been, tried to be instituted over, hundreds of years. France had started the resale royalties in the early 1900s, but they didn't become commonplace across auction houses. So as these works get bought and sold over time, artists would almost entirely miss out on, earning some of the value that they've created through those works as it changes hands. In the Zora protocol, when you mint, you can define, well, what is the resale royalty that I would like as a creator as this thing is bought and sold in the future. So it could be 10%, 20%, literally whatever you want. And that is built into the protocol itself. So when you settle on the protocol, that royalty is honored by the market. And our view is that, well, instead of seeing 10 or 20 marketplaces that are helping people view and browse and curate and collect and experience NFTs, there should be millions of these marketplaces. So, and maybe every website that is, now every website is able to build on top of this universally accessible content and media. Well, they should have a direct line to the marketplace themselves. So, by bringing the market into a single point, making it permissionless and open to everyone, every website can now be a marketplace in some way, shape, or form. So to flash back to here, it's I think we can actually get closer to this direction because now we have this public and open layer where now every single one of these platforms, if they're starting to curate their own subset of NFTs that exist on the protocol, and one of their community members happens to love the meme or love the video or really love the song, if that platform still wants to help that person directly collect and engage with the market within its own website, it can. It doesn't have to push you out into some other marketplace. Every website can become a marketplace in essence. And we're starting to see this kind of play out. The Zora protocol only went live at the start of this year. And we're already starting to see like these like unique and specific experiences on the protocol. So one that launched a couple of weeks ago is Catalog Works. So they are building an entirely specific experience to music. They want to come at the Spotify's and the SoundClouds of the world and explore what it means to give ownership of the music and the value of music back to musicians. And it's a very distinct experience that you could never do for, like, this experience wouldn't work for memes perhaps, or typefaces, or whatever type of marketplace you want to see. Like, we should see a very rich diversity of experiences based on the types of NFTs that are being created. And then similarly, like Mirror, this amazing tool for like writing, so coming at the mediums and the Substacks of the world. It's like, well, when you're minting your writing or your blog posts, your essays, whatever it is, like, this is also being minted on top of the Zora protocol. And again, it's like a very different experience to catalog. And I think like what we're trying to help bootstrap and help teams build over time is like, well, what are the unique social media experiences, marketplaces experiences, or niche markets that we can help bring into fruition? So if you wanted to build a meme specific auction house, then you can do that. If you wanted to create a market just for music samples or stems, or typefaces, or code snippets, or 3D objects, or name any form of information or data or file type, you can mint and create a very rich and unique experience. And then you can start to integrate and curate across all of these different places because you're built on a shared and open layer. And again, like we're starting to see like very early examples of what this type of ecosystem looks like. We've got radio stations. Someone built like a TikTok-based interface on media on the protocol, virtual worlds, interesting text, collectible experiences. And then, we had someone in the Zora community build a Zora interface before we even did. We deployed the protocol a month before Zora.co went live. And, we saw someone in the community just build their own interface on top of it, because everything is completely open, which was like a really cool moment for us. So to speak to like some of the things that the Zora protocol unlocks, now that you have these trustless markets, it meaningfully unlocks trustless DAOs and all of these interesting use cases. So if you think about a DAO minting a Zora NFT, now the DAO is directly interacting with and has the opportunity to accept bids. So today, if you construct a DAO, and we did this with Saint Fame, you like mint an NFT, because the market's kind of on a per marketplace basis, you need to figure out how the DAO can like interact with that marketplace. And in many cases, there's just no direct tie to do it. Now, if you mint an NFT with the market built in, if there's say a bid for $1,000, the DAO can trustlessly vote to accept that bid. And if it does accept that bid, the funds can then trustlessly be put into that DAO's treasury or distributed to token holders, or can then be used to, do any collective action with. And these DAOs, just to give you kind of a sense of like, a visual, it's like, yeah, these DAOs can be governed by obviously a token, but they're starting to like manage any amount of NFTs and like can trustlessly accrue the value and, from the activities around those things. So you can see like, well, what if you have artist collectives that are now collectively minting under a single name or a single collective identity? What if you have DAOs that are now collecting as a community? So you can have, hip hop, one of the largest like subreddits. Well, what if they were able to pull together capital and they could start commissioning and bidding on and collecting NFTs as a community, and they can choose to vote to then, accept bids, put it up for auction, and they can trustlessly then like, create and accrue that value together and distribute that value. And there's like amazing early examples of this, like Flamingo, but the trustless nature of the protocol now means it's like, well, it's very simple and straightforward to create an open template that anyone can now start creating it on a per community basis. which drives us to these very interesting notions of community ownership, both for DAOs that want to collectively create and curate and collect together, but also lets you layer community ownership into the platform levels themselves. So if you think about the catalogs of the world with their music, it's like, well, if they're facilitating these auctions and curating as a community and curating as a platform, it's very easily to programmably route the value capture from those platforms as a community and distribute it to everyone who is, using those platforms in marketplaces. So we truly think we are entering into an internet renaissance, one, because we're actually getting a step closer to what the internet actually was supposed to be. Like we're exiting this massive intranet era and heading into a world where it's like, well, anyone can create content that is platformless and can like stand on its own right, accrue its own value, and is entirely interoperable, universally accessible, and open to everyone. So our view is that the social media platforms as we know it are dead. It will take a very long time for them to entirely go away, but there are very direct incentives and I think a general want for people to, we all know and feel that like, well, if we're on Instagram or YouTube, like we can kind of feel that it's not entirely our own space, or it's like, you have to wade through the ads and, the way that value capture in these platforms, the way that they are constructed are just totally at odds with what information wants to be, which is it wants to be free. So our view is that the mega platforms are no more, and they will be replaced by public permissionless protocols that are open and accessible to everyone, not just accessible to the platforms who are kind of constructing these huge walled gardens. And that, there are now the tools for creators and communities to be their own platform. And you can be your own or build your own or do whatever you want, because, the starting state or the barrier to entry to now start a valuable platform is so much lower. You no longer have to compete and catch up to the entire content database of Instagram or TikTok. You can now build on top of and stand on the shoulders of all of the content and media. And now it comes down to like, well, how do you want to curate? How do you want to present and experience all of that content? You no longer have to build and catch up to that content. You can just start from there and start to really experiment and create your own rich and unique experiences. And that's only possible when you have entirely public and permissionless infrastructure. Whenever you have permissioned or central control, the incentives eventually get skewed towards defending that value capture mechanism, versus if it's public and permissionless by design, no one can really stop you or stop anyone from building or creating in the ways that you want, or can like change the terms of how you're creating on that infrastructure. So for us, it was critical that when we deployed the Zora protocol, it was open source, fully audited twice, verified, and deployed in a way that was unstoppable. So if we ever wanted to do an upgrade to a Zora v2, we couldn't just flick a switch at the smart contract level and force everyone to upgrade. We would have to create an entirely new instance and provide the option or the path for people to move across, but only if they wanted to. Zora v1 can never be changed, upgraded, or stopped. It'll always live there as an option that is public and accessible to everyone. So yeah, if you want to learn more about the SDKs and tools that we've built to make it easy to interact with it, this is the kind of starting point, Zora.engineering. We have the white paper, the protocol source code, links to the GitHub, and then a subgraph and JavaScript tools for you to like interact with the protocol. Also join us in Discord, so Zora.community. If you just go to that link, it'll take you into our Discord, and we've got channels there where you can learn about the protocol, ask developer questions, and then just interact with the creative community that's growing there. And then to kind of explore everything that's happening across the protocol, Zora.co is kind of this general explorer and open marketplace that is letting you interact directly with everything. So that's where you can like see exactly what's being minted, who's bidding on what. You can see everything from there. And yeah, it's kind of just like a bird's eye view of the way we think about different parts of the stack that we're building out. So there's the protocol itself, the OS, so the SDK, and then of course like the interface, the open source interface and open interface for everyone to like look into and explore everything that's happening across the protocol. And our long-term goal and the thing we're driving towards is that, you know, everyone is interacting with Zora everywhere but Zora. If we're just creating a huge mega marketplace that everyone has to go to mint and share and exchange all of these NFTs, then we've failed. Like, we want there to be millions of marketplaces that is fundamentally powering the internet itself. So the Zora is successful when it's everywhere but Zora.co, or most used everywhere outside of that. So yeah, that is kind of the end. And yeah, I don't know if there are questions in the chat, or if Dee, you wanted to add some color on as well, but yeah, it's the start of the internet renaissance.
No, I think that was pretty perfect.
Amazing. Jacob, Dee, thank you so much. I'll kind of just ask you to just disable the screen